very special co-host. That's retired first grade detective Bill Ryan of the NYPD. Introduce yourself to the audience, Bill, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Bill Ryan, retired from the NYPD. I did my last 13 years in the Arson and Explosion Squad, investigating bombings, fires, terrorism. And I'm glad to be out here with my friends having some discussions about all matters in policing.
Very good, Bill. We're glad to have you here there, buddy. Our guest today is retired Port Authority Police Department Detective Tom McHale. Tom has done a lot of different things in his career, but he's really known in law enforcement for two different things. His investigations of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan, which we're not going to delve into today, and his investigations of old cop homicides all across America from the 70s and 80s that were committed by the Black Liberation Army. We're going to talk to Tom about those in a minute. As we always do here at the Weekly Roundup, we're going to remember those officers who paid the ultimate sacrifice since our last recording. We get this information from the Officer Down Memorial page. That's odmp.org. As I tell you all the time, and I'll tell you again, it's a great website. It tells the stories of these heroes who we honor and never forget. Since our last episode, the following officers have paid the ultimate price. Director N. Kyle Coleman of the Behar County Fire Marshal Service. He died July 14th of COVID. Correction Officer Jerry Esparza of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. He died July 15th of COVID. Correction Officer Jackson Pongay of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. He died July 19th of COVID. Wow, Texas is really taking a beating with COVID. And the last officer that we're going to remember today is Deputy William Garner of the Franklin County Sheriff's Office in Georgia. He died July 19th. He was struck by a vehicle while securing an accident scene. We honor those officers and we never forget them here at Inside Blue 360 at the Weekly Roundup. And if you'd like to read more about them, please go to odmp.org. Thank you. So our guest today is retired Detective Tom McHale. I've known Tommy for 30 years. Just before he came on the air, my wife goes, "Did you do a pre-interview with Tom?" And I said, "We've been doing that for 30 years now." So Tom is retired from an agency that has jurisdiction in both New York and New Jersey. We have listeners and viewers who are not from the New York City area and really don't know what the Port Authority Police does. They secure a lot of transportation infrastructure, airports, railroads, bridges, tunnels, things like this. Because they're in the metropolitan New York area, they're constantly being hit by terrorists. And two of the biggest terrorism events in the history of New York City occurred at the World Trade Center, which is Port Authority property. On 9/11, the Port Authority Police Department suffered the biggest loss of any police department in one day in the history of America, when 37 of their officers were killed during the 9/11 attack. It's a proud agency. I work with great cops from the Port Authority, outstanding officers and detectives. And Tommy's probably one of the best to ever come from there. He's won the Medal of Honor from the Port Authority Police Department. So Tom, we're here to talk to you today about your role in investigating cold cop homicides from the 1970s and 80s. Homicides that had not been closed with an arrest, that were committed by the Black Liberation Army. Obviously, there's a lot of strife going on involving law enforcement and the African-American community in our nation. And this is not the first time we've been down this road. And in the 60s and 70s, and I guess into the early 80s, there were members of the Black community who decided to band together and arm themselves and go to war against law enforcement in the United States. And you investigated a lot of those. How did you get involved in that in the first place?
I was assigned to the FBI Newark Joint Terrorism Task Force in 1995 after getting promoted to detective. And one of the cases I was assigned to work jointly with Kevin Tomey from New Jersey State Police, also assigned to the JTTF, was the fugitive Joanne Chesmart, aka Asada Shakur, who escaped from prison in 1979, where she was serving time for being convicted of the murder of Trooper Werner Forrester and the wounding of Trooper James Harper. So I started working those cases, with that specific case, and at that time, Kevin Tormey, was just a walking encyclopedia, and I'd say specifically about Chesmart, which was enough, so I would, in preparation for different renditions that we had planned throughout the years, I got involved, and then basically dove into the BLA, who's who, especially with the name changes, and it's you can have just a squad assigned to that, and just to try and iron out the information and misinformation, sometimes intentional, sometimes not, disseminated by both the BLA and law enforcement. It's just, as you well know, you read some of the things, and and so to try and in preparation for court documents, it has to be factual, it has to be corroborated, and in doing, and securing warrants and whatnot, you have to provide the absolute truth, and doing that, it's a lot of digging, and sometimes it makes people red in the face, but you do get to the truth. So I started with that, and that evolved into, as Bill mentioned earlier, I later became a partner of Tom Nerney, the legendary Tom Nerney, first grade detective at a major case squad. And I was helping Tom prior to, I'm jumping here, but prior to working with, being assigned with Tom the major case squad, I helped Tom with the case brought against the city of New York by former BLA members, Druba Moore, and when they sued the city, and we had to dig up information on the cases that they were involved in. Some cases dismissed, others not, and so Tom would rely on me, as far as who's who. Some of them shared names, nicknames. Some had the same last name but weren't related. So Tom would call me over in Newark, and I would go back and forth with him, and doing so, sometimes we come across cases that were solved, and others that were not.
How many unsolved cases were there, do you think?
Oh, man.
Just cop killings.
Cop killings? Well, it's hard to put a number on it. Some
I know that cases.
Some cases, right? Some cases, like one person was arrested, but there was more involved. And there's also homicides of actual Black Panther BLA members that are unsolved. Robert Webb is one of them, which ties into Foster and Laurie, where he was killed on 121st Street and 7th Avenue, got involved with after the split of the Black Panthers, when the Newton and Cleaver fraction split, and the BLA was formed. So there is a number of cases, and of course, California, when John Miller was out in John Miller, current Deputy Commissioner of Counterterrorism at NYPD, when he was assigned to, when he was out in Los Angeles, and San Francisco contacted John about the Sergeant Young homicide, and if he had any connections back at NYPD with investigating BLA. John said, no, but I have a Port Authority detective, So John referred the San Francisco, team back to me, on the Sergeant Young homicide.
So was Sergeant Young the first one you investigated, or was what was
No,
the first
actually,
one outside of going to Chesmart?
Actually, while working Chesmart in Newark, Freddie Hilton is arrested in Brooklyn for child molestation and a gun, and a 6'9". The detectives contact, and of course when he gets arrested underneath his now name, Siddiqui Camus Siddiqui, whatever, and of course the allegations of child molestation. He's trying to put himself off, or not to the detective, younger detective, older, as who he really is. No, I'm big, BLA, cop shooter, bank robber, back and forth. And they're like, who, so of course they call Tom Nerney. They're like, hey, we got this guy, Siddiqui Camus, and, his name is Fred Hilton. And Nerney's like, well, I'll put you in touch with Tom McHale. So the Nerney refers the detectives to me in Newark, and they're like, oh, do you know Freddie Hilton? I go, yeah, I know of him, sure, back and forth. So like, oh, we'd like to get a background on this. We have an active case, gun and child. I'm like, yeah. I says, come over, give him a date, come over. I says, come visit me in Newark, and I'll give you what I know about him, the facts, they were in the right church, wrong pew. Like, oh, was he involved in this case? I said, no, he wasn't involved in that. He was involved in, not committing so many crimes back then, So, but in the interim, and I know this is going to, to some people it's going to sound, but before they got there, I wanted to get myself in order and have the absolute facts, especially since, it's an active court case, or going to be an active court case. I go into a storage room, not a file room, not where this should be. And on a shelf is the notes for an affidavit for a Title III, a warrant, and handwritten notes, and just on the shelf. And again, not in like the file room where BLA stuff. This is just a storage room where we keep water for the squad back, and on the shelf, and I pick it up and I'm reading it, and it's an affidavit, and it discusses the homicide in Atlanta, Georgia, of a police officer involving Freddie Hilton, Twyman Myers, and I'm reading this. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me! And I see the scratched out and rewritten and other bank robberies and all. I'm like, and I had just been in Atlanta at the time, 2001. So in 2000, I was in Atlanta on the Yahweh homicide case. So I called down, no mention of the officer's name, but just some details about him singing in a band. So I called down and I'm like, hey, you have a, open case of an officer killed, 1970s, but no specific. I said, obviously prior to the date of this affidavit, and they're like, no, we have no open cases. So me being me, I'm like, nah, do me a favor, I call back and get the sergeant who I work with on the Yahweh homicide. I'm like, can you do me a favor? I says, just to satisfy, can you go look and you research the cops that were killed in this period back, so he does, comes back to me and says, yeah, he says, yeah, we have a cop, James Richard Green, that was killed in a gas station in his van, but the perpetrators in that are both dead. I go, oh, who are the perpetrators? He says, Twyman Myers, notorious cop killer from New York, BLA, and Freddie Hilton. I said, well, Freddie Hilton is not dead. He was just arrested. I contacted FBI Atlanta. Don Haldeman, former New York, he was in a New York office, worked in the 93 Trade Center bombing. And I'm like, Don, he goes, I'll open a case, but I want you to, spearhead it from up there. But, we'll work with Atlanta PD. So we put together a team of Atlanta PD, Atlanta FBI, myself, Brooklyn, 6'9" guys, and reopened the James Green investigation, which led to the arrest and conviction of Freddie Hilton for the 1970, November 2nd, 1971 homicide of James Richard Green. So, and in doing that, I used I came across, and then of course, once that opened up, and as you witnessed when you came over to Newark, I had all this information, and again, some of it, right church, wrong pew, but they were close enough. And then of course, things that certain crimes that were charged and were acquittals, that paperwork is not available and all. But luckily, some of these people wrote books and they described these crimes.
The BLA people wrote books.
Yes. Joanne Chesmard's aunt, Evelyn Williams, wrote inadmissible evidence. And kindly, she, in defending Joanne Chesmard, she's like, and she was acquitted of this, and she was, but luckily she put in there who was charged with her, and so I was able to piece together an extensive timeline that I worked over the years, a BLA timeline, and so in doing this, I come across an FBI 302 that details a cooperating witness. First he lies, but then after his mother talks to him, and he's down south, and he decides to tell the truth, and he enumerates 20 plus crimes committed by the BLA. His and the cell, how they broke into cells, and who was in what cell, and so I took that and I established a comprehensive timeline of the cells, how they operated, crimes committed, where they were, and I mean, tedious doesn't describe it. It's just, again, with information put out and people accused of we suspect this person, and they do, that's what you suspect. But then later on, you find out, okay, no, it wasn't this person. It was actually this group, and then that would line up with the cell theory as it was explained to us by the cooperating witness.
So this is 20 years ago. You're doing this under the auspices of the FBI. You're probably doing all this by hand, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I would imagine the current FBI, you would have an analyst assigned to you who'd be putting everything in a computer database. But it's 2 decades ago.
Yeah, and it's funny because how you said, Matt, a lot of this stuff is I don't know if it's still available, but it was called manual indices. They have indices now where you can go and look, and it'll tell you what file, what page, back and forth, and you go. But back then, these guys worked off of manual indices, so index cards, in file cabinets, and you would go and look, and so they would have to be updated, of course, by hand. So I'm informed about these manual indices, and I happen just to live in a manual indices room. I mean, the person in charge is like, yeah, go ahead, So I would, but then you'd have to pull a card, write down the information, and then go search it by hand in the closed case files, and that's, and then of course when you pulled that folder, the first page may be nice and juicy and have, oh yeah, so and so and so and so and so and so, and you're like, okay, here's, wow, this is fantastic. And then as you get down to page, 600, what's written on page 3 is incorrect, but if you don't go all the way through it, and if you just take page 3, you're now regenerating, information that was uncorroborated or corroborated, and so it also was true for NYPD with Major K Squad. You had a detective back in the day, and I mentioned this when I received the NYPD retired detectives audio award. I mentioned in my acceptance, Joe Tidmarsh, and Joe had the knowledge back then. Joe created major case indices, and with photographs of the individuals and what fives they are. Because you had, and you know, this is your home. You had, you know, all the different boroughs, the squads assigned to that, the different units assigned to those boroughs. So there wasn't just like one BLA file. You know, you had the Queens, Bronx, Brooklyn. You know, you had the different boroughs, their fives, their cases. Then you had the individual crimes that were committed in those boroughs. You know, you had those case fives. You know, Tidmarsh took this and put these on index cards, cross-referencing the individuals who were, you know, I mean, it was just absolutely remarkable to be doing this in the 70s. You know,
I still use index cards. I use index cards still.
So I mentioned, you know, I mean, and you know, it was just, and you know, and your co-host Bill Ryan, and what happens is after I do the Green case, I come across information on Foster and Laurie, and as you will know, you were involved, and the case is made for me to be assigned to the major case squad. So, Bill's.
I want to give a shout out here to a former guest of our show, Bernie Carrick, who was instrumental in this. Bernie, good job.
So, John Faust is working with your co-host there, Bill Ryan at A&E, Arson and Explosion.
Great detective.
He has wind of, you know, okay, you know, they're bringing up this Port Authority detective to work, you know, these cases with Nerney. So he's aware of it. And he happens to stop a detective who's wheeling out the file cabinet with Joe Tidmarsh's indices that he's going to throw away. So he has a hand truck and he's wheeling it down the hall. Faust physically stops this detective and says, well, you know what? And this detective was part of like the Asian translators for the kidnapping. You know, or we know what that was. But anyway, so Faust stops this guy and says, you know, what are you doing? He says, oh, you know, making room for, you know, the coffee maker, whatever. He's like, no. He's like,
priorities, baby, priorities.
he goes, no. He goes, we have a guy coming up here that needs that backup. No, we got to get rid of it. You know, it's in. So Faust, you know, file jacks the file cabinet, hides it, you know, and then so I come up and, you know, I'm assigned to the major case squad. I'm with George Duke and Charlie Wells, and work with Tom Nerney, of course, and you know, we're sitting back, so we're just getting, you know, we set up a war room, a conference room that is ours, and you know, with stickies as our, you know. And you know, and then John Faust comes in and introduces himself. Says, "Hey," he goes, I got something that you may be interested in." I said, "Oh yeah, you know, sure." So he takes me into where he file jacked this file cabinet and goes, "Look at this," and I'm like, "Oh my god!" And then how important is that? Is the deceased, you know, members of the BLA. A lot of their photographs are not on file. They're you know, if they're dead,
right, they get expunged. The
photographs are gone, you know, so you can go down to, you know, to BCI and now, you know, you know, so a lot of the photographs, you know, and to do photo arrays, which we did with successful hits on homicides, you know, you have to use photographs, of course, from that era. So, I mean, that by John Faust saving that file cabinet and us getting those photographs, and then of course, you know, using the FBI photo unit to enhance, clean up, I call it the, you know, the college, you know, the school, you know, they did posters for me. They did, you know.
Not a bad group of people to have helping you, though, right?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah, no, yeah. I, you know, Audrey Liss and the group in FBI Newark were just, you know, and they were like into it. You know, they were like, I'm like, you know, I need these pictures to look somewhat similar. You know, whether they were used for confirmation photos, which a lot of these pictures were because they were known to each other. But you know, you're going back 30, 40 years now. you have to, and so you would show the book, and you would.
Who are you showing the pictures to? Old victims or old BLA people or?
Well, when they were used in photo arrays, they were shown as witnesses. A prostitute picked out Freddie Hilton's photograph in the Green homicide. So,
okay.
Wow.
And she was still available as a witness? She was still available as a witness 30 years later?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And Don Haldeman and the U.S. Marshal found her in Florida, and she picks out Freddie Hilton's photograph from 1970, circa 1971, 72. We had.
Did she know him, or I mean, did they have a relationship? How did she know him? It wasn't just.
She remembered. No, they were hiding out from robbing the Queens Bank. They were down in Atlanta, back Chattanooga, Tennessee. Similar to what's going on now. They were hiding out from the Queens Bank robbery down. 14 of them down there. So. And this is all, of course, during the split of when the Cleaver fraction and the Newton fraction split, which was announced in February of March 1971, publicly announced while Newton was visiting Connecticut, is when they said we're splitting the Black Panther Party, which caused a civil war in the Black Panthers. The Black Liberation Army on the New York side was created from that. That's the birth of the BLA in New York. So what they were facing at the time, the BLA was, and the Black Panthers was number one, the war with the police, and of course the internal. So paranoia was huge, and when you hear COINTELPRO, the FBI looking at, they speak of this often, and which of course existed and all, and they blame a lot of the misinformation on being disseminated through sources and all, which it was, but also it came internally, So you had them killing each other, and also being killed by police, and so that
they had their own ministry of disinformation.
I'm sorry.
They had their own ministry of disinformation.
Yes, they did. And
some of it accidental, some of it on purpose.
Yeah. But I mean, like they had people who were above ground who, they had publications, the Right On newspaper and all, but they actually put out that, communiques saying that they were going to, retaliate. They were going to kill cops. They put it out on the paper and all, and they made good on their promises.
Yeah. It's funny, Tom, just, when you talk about, like the file cabinet that our friend John Faust, one of my teammates, had found, I'm always fascinated with old cases, like when I would do old bombings or old fires. So much great work is done. And then it's, because it wasn't the computer age and it was put on notebooks and on, I was going to say DD5, that's reports that detectives fill out to document their work. And you get these cases, and after a couple of years, they get filed away. Like I always say, it's like the great scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark where the guy's putting it in a big warehouse, and you never find it again. And I mean, it's so much of the work that people like yourself do. It's because you're great researchers. But I'm always fascinated how much we probably lost out there. Great work that cops did that, for whatever reason, we just can't find the results, or we can't find the file, or we're not lucky enough to have a guy like John Faust grab a file cabinet.
Well, unfortunately, so you guys were detectives and I was a sergeant, so I'll speak as a boss here a little bit. Not everybody has got the commitment of guys like you two. And a lot of people come on a job just to have a job. We came on the job to do the job. A lot of guys come on the job to have the job, guys and gals. And
Jerry, it's got to be a calling. You always say it's like being a priest. You can't just wake up one day. You've got to feel it. You've got to want to do it.
One of the things I learned from working on Forster and Laurie with Tom, we'll talk about Forster and Laurie a little more detailed, I guess, in a minute. Evidence disappears from cop killings.
All the time.
I was working a cop killing as a boss in the Bronx because it was an all hands on deck, and I went up there just to do what I can as a sergeant. And one of the best things a sergeant can do is sign paperwork, right?
Especially overtime slips.
Especially overtime slips. And I was signing a voucher for shell casings. And I'm like, in 25 years, if this case isn't solved, there's going to be some future Tom McHale or Bill Ryan who's going to pick this up. And they're going to go, I wonder where those shell cases are, because there's some super duper way now to analyze shell casings that didn't exist in 2004. And they're going to be gone. They'll be destroyed, because evidence does get destroyed, because warehouses are finite. You can't keep everything forever. And I took a grease pencil. And even though the voucher, the property voucher that holds the evidence is all typed up and the plastic bag is stapled to it, I wrote in a grease pencil, "Cop homicide, do not destroy." And I just thought maybe in 15 or 20 years, some jerk who's about to destroy this will look at that and think just for a second and go show his sergeant. And the sergeant will go, well, maybe we should get rid of this, keep that. And then some cold case investigator will come along and it's
unbelievable, Jerry. Unbelievable.
You know what? I'm sorry, Tom.
That you mentioned that, and that has happened, and it has happened specifically in the Foster and Law investigation, and Piagentini and Jones, who were assassinated before Foster and Laurie up in home.
I'm gonna do what I was for a second.
The order came down, on paper, on a 5 or a 49 to cases over, destroy the evidence, but ballistic detective, was like, okay, I got the order, no, and then okay, evidence was destroyed, no, but he didn't do it. But it can't be kept in the same area that it was, so now it goes into a box, and luckily these boxes were found by astute, detectives 30 years later, and called and said, hey, does this name, and the perp's name may not, but does this name mean anything to you? Does that mean? I'm like, oh my God, absolutely. So now I find myself in ballistics with this treasure trove of, and some of it was used. They kept it for their museum board that they have on the BLA with the guns. And again, they were right church, right pew. They had, if you remember ballistics, they had the guns typed up onto the wall. Well, they were BLA guns, but that wasn't so-and-so's gun. I'm like, no. So I was invited down, and I sort of straightened out whose gun, assigning it to.
Are you also a museum curator? Is that what you're saying?
When it comes to the BLA weapons, yes. So I was able to put whose gun, with whom, to specific case, 61 numbers, vouch, So now you have a historical, oh yeah, this was Tormen Myers, because they had multiple machine guns, they had, Brownings, they had multiple, oh yeah, this is the Burke gun here. I'm like, no, that's one that he did have, but when they rob guns, they rob them
So I want to talk about Foster and Laurie. You mentioned Piagentini and Jones also. Not everybody who watches the podcast or listens to it is an old timer like the three of us. Piagentini and Jones and Foster and Laurie were two pairs of cops. They were assassinated about 10 months apart, Tom?
6 months. 5 or 6 months apart? Yeah.
They were unusual at the time because they were black and white partners, both of them. Piagentini and Jones were assassinated uptown in a housing project. Foster and Laurie were assassinated on the Lower East Side of Manhattan at the corner of East 11th Street and Avenue B.
Front of 174 Avenue B.
So they were, this was pretty scary time for the cops on a job back then. None of us were on a job back then. It was the 1970s. And this, I lived in the city. This was front page stuff. It was chilling time for the cops. And as Tom was,
I was worried because my dad was a cop going around.
Oh, wow.
And I remember all this going on and wondering, if my father was going to be killed. It was a scary time. My best friend, the late Dave Campbell, his father, Dave Campbell Sr., was in the 9th Squad when Foster and Laurie was killed. So even as a kid, with all this going on, I had a very keen sense of what was going on and the war on cops. And it was,
And Bill, it's funny you mentioned that. One of the bosses that came to the Major K squad, Carbone, Bill Carbone.
Yeah, Bill.
His dad was on some of the fives. So as I'm sitting there going through these, fives that we acquired from the, from different boroughs, and I mean thousands and thousands of fives. I read every single one. I would come across Bill's dad. I'd say, "Hey, Lieutenant, look at this," So Bill reiterated the same thing you are, about those times.
Scary times, and like now, it's a scary time to be a cop now.
So we won't bore anybody with how this came to be. If anybody wants to buy us a drink one day, we'll tell them at a bar. But Tom, a Port Authority detective assigned to the Newark JTT office, was either loaned directly from Newark or loaned to the New York office, but somehow or another, the FBI, he wasn't loaned to the NYPD from the Port Authority Police. He was loaned to the NYPD from the FBI, right? Is that how it goes, Tom?
No, I'm assigned to the Port Authority, so Charlie Wells actually said, they were discussing that, well, he's FBI Newark, he has to go to the New York office, and Charlie Wells goes, he's a Port Authority detective. You can, so it was a 49. It was a 49 from George Duke to the Port Authority asking for me to be assigned. So that but I still maintained my position at FBI Newark. FBI New York at the time wasn't too happy about the arrangement, but I was started, and then through their objections, I was expelled from from the city for until it was ironed out, and then they had.
Did you get 3 paychecks or just one?
Just one paycheck. One paycheck.
Yeah. 3 times.
So then after they had powwows and meetings, it worked out. Then we had Wells and Duke accepted a New York JTTF person assigned to Tom Nerney and myself. And he knew it was just politics. So he was.
Unfortunately, politics is so much part of our profession. I never got into it with you, how you did it, but I was always fascinated how you were in police headquarters. He's a Port Authority guy working out of Newark. We were just glad to have you around, but it was.
All right. So we'll tell the story in 60 seconds.
Okay, here it comes.
Good fortune. Hard work is the number one thing to close a case, and you make your own luck, because if you work hard, you cut
absolutely
the breaks.
The harder you work, the luckier you get.
And Tom and I knew each other as street cops because we were both hard workers. We were always at court. We were always running into each other at active scenes. And at the time, Tom is at Forlini's. We can't wait for Forlini's to reopen. At the time that Tom is looking into these BLA cases and gets onto this idea that force and lorry can be closed with an arrest, I'm on the staff for Bernie Carrick, who is the police commissioner. So normally, as Bill, as anybody who's been with the NYPD knows, to try to run the table, it's almost like Vegas, to run the table where you can get like boss after successive boss, and it goes all the way to the top to say, we need a Port Authority cop to come in here and lead an investigation to the murder of 2 of our guys. There's going to be a boss somewhere along that way who's going to say, bullshit, that ain't happening, and I'm going to give it to my guy who was never read anything about the BLA, and now has got to read the thousands and thousands of pages of stuff that Tom has read over the past few years. And that was not going to happen. I knew it wasn't going to happen. And Tom knew it first. He convinced me. We had a meeting over at Newark FBI, and then I sat on this for like a couple of days. Bernie, if you watch, I sat on a couple of days figuring how was I going to frame this to the commissioner. I went into the commissioner, I made my pitch, and it was successful. And then the commissioner, who of course is the guy, no one can countermand his orders, just kind of threw the snowball off the top of the mountain, and it went downhill. And that's how Tommy comes to be literally like a member of the NYPD, even though he wasn't. He did. We'll just say that he did get some pushback. Anybody here who's watching who works in a big agency knows if you get an outsider to come in, he did get some pushback. That's natural, and there's nothing wrong with that. But some of it was outrageously wrong, and those people got to live with their own consciences. you know, and they know what they did. For the most part, though, people did support Tom and help Tom because they knew it was a noble cause. Tom, you had to find a witness. Tell me about finding a witness.
Yeah. So in
I don't know if you want to name them. Let's just say
no, I'm not.
witness.
Someday when Cy Vance is out of office, maybe this case will. But
I think he's going to be replaced by someone even worse. But
well,
is there someone worse?
Oh yeah, we're going to get something worse. We're going to get a socialist.
Good.
Yeah.
So
better the devil you know sometimes, man. Better the devil you know sometimes.
So what happens is, and to enhance what Bill mentioned as far as guys who kept their notes back, and meeting these retired detectives from the 70s who worked this case or who worked at BLA, and now I have to introduce myself as a Port Guard detective. Of course, they came from a very righteously proud largest police department in the world, which and they had the signs like that's behind Bill there, greatest detectives in the world, and I agree, and some of the worst, as well. So
yeah.
But anyway, these guys, of course, winning them over was, I always took, I always took the like Willie Pep, the old time fighter. I took the beating first and then had a counterpunch. What are you doing here? What's so special about you? Why are you working? And I would have to get over that hurdle. So the first.
What was amazing, Tom, too, is that it wasn't like there was somebody in the PD that was doing what you were doing and you were working his side of the street. I mean, I don't think people realize this. Nobody was doing this. I mean, this was stuff that was dead.
Right.
Nobody was working on it.
Correct.
This
Correct.
guy from the Port Authority coming in. So
some guys would get insulted saying, "Oh, Fortune Lawyer wasn't closed." No, yes, it was dormant.
Right.
It was dormant. But anyway,
dormant. There's a word.
After meeting with these guys and then sitting talking to them, I'd win them over, and then the information, whether we their own notebooks, their own notes, their own paperwork, their own photographs, started being mailed to me or given to me. I would start receiving UPS, FedEx mail at the major case office. And I'm like, oh my God, or copies, some copies, but some originals, and then they would call and want to come in, sit down, meet. I'm like, absolutely, and I met some of these guys who I've been reading about who are absolute legends, and just sitting there and the lessons I learned from them, and it's just amazing.
And there's so much great intel out there. I mean, I remember when I had first gotten into A&E, I had these fires up in the Heights, and I won't bore you with the story, but I was getting nowhere with it. And then all of a sudden, a guy who was in PMD, a retired detective named Quentin DeSantis, I think he's since passed on. He saw this thing in the newspaper, and he called me up and goes, "Have you looked at, Mo, Larry, and Curly and what they were doing?" And I'm like, "What? Who?" I had no idea. I mean, it went from I knew nothing, and all of a sudden, he blew the whole thing up for me. And I mean, there's been times now where even, I've seen cases where I knew some things. I've called up the cops, hey, and that's, through the brotherhood, a lot of things get solved. And unfortunately, every year as more of us get older and we pass on, a lot of that great intel is.
But I got to share this with you because your viewers will, one of these detectives I speak with is Detective Cephas, who was on the receiving end of the phone call that came from Frank McCoy in San Francisco after they lock up Bottom in Washington for the a shooting of attempted murder of Sergeant Kowalkowski, where Waverly Jones's gun is recovered. And they call back to the NYPD, because they have an informant in the cell saying, hey, these guys are bragging about killing a cop, on the East Coast in NYPD. So, and, the gun that was retrieved, so the sergeant's calling in the number, but at the time there was like a K in front of the number. He's not including the K, so he's getting, no, click, and he's being hung up on. So they kind of rough up their informant, like, don't lie to us again, back and forth, and then he's like, I swear to God, they talk about it. So Frank McCoy calls back again. And listen, almost similar to me with Atlanta. He's like, this guy is he's a good, can you? And this time he gets Cephas. Cephas is like, yeah, of course we do. We have, 2 cops killed, so they, Cephas winds up going to San Francisco, and they're putting him in the cell with these guys, with Bottom and Washington. They're putting him in the cell as an undercover. So he gives if he's in trouble, he gives the safe word, the passcode to, of course, the correction. Well, the BLA, they're up on this. They know, and they suspect that Cephas is either an informant or a cop immediately. Cephas realizes that he's been made, so he's given a code word to the correction officer. Unfortunately, the tour change, the day correction officer doesn't give the safe word and all to the night one, let's say, and so Cephas is giving, and then he gets a little more voiceful. Well, correction, oh yeah, corrections goes in, beats the hell out of Cephas, right, and then and leaves. Well, now these guys see that, they're like, man, there's no way that this guy's in a
Oh, you're right.
So they give everything to Cephas because he just took a beating. So I mean,
and he kept his mouth shut.
Yeah.
Holy crap!
Yeah, so I mean, like,
that's awesome.
It's a great story.
You learn stories like that, and like, oh my God, and he was like, nah, and he was like, nah, he didn't hold anything against the correction, God bless him. And I'm like, oh, I'd want to come
had a beer after.
yeah, no, because no,
I don't know if I'd been that cool, but
yeah, exactly. But
mackerel.
But again, the honesty and the openness of the retired guys, and especially since this witness that Jerry's talking about, I just find the briefings of him, both from NYPD, FBI, down south, all the way back to New York, and I'm going through this treasure trove of information that he's providing, and he's giving firsthand, and he's also and then so and so told me that John told Bill about, so that you have to take with a grain of salt, as you well know, both these with your experience. But in doing so, I would put what he heard firsthand, and he talks about specifically in this time frame about 21 crimes. So now I researched those crimes, okay? And I come up with like 18 or 19 convictions or guilty pleas on the perpetrators who he named, and I'm talking about cases that went on later on in the late 70s, 80s.
The cops were getting the right people, sounds like. That's good. Okay.
That's correct. And he provided this information in 1972, 71, 72, 72. Obviously, Forrest Laurie killed in 72. So he provides this in 72. And I'm going through, and he describes the BLA cells and who's in what cell, to his, because not all cell members were known to each other. They were independent of each other, which also led to easy infiltration, because you could say that you were part of that cell and there was no, okay, let's call and check it, because they wouldn't do that even amongst each other. So
no membership cards.
Yeah, correct. So what happens is I'm in doing this, I create this, a flow chart or this massive information board, and I'm going through this, and it's all lining up, and this is over day, weeks, and going through all this, and then I get to Foster and Laurie, and it just poo-poos the entire the theory, the chart, the cell, the timeline, because of who was named as the getaway driver, who was identified in photo arrays, and it shoots this guy's information. It shoots it full of holes, and I'm like, this is not good. So I call Tom Nerney, and I make the case go out. I explain Tom what I just explained to you. I'm like, this is who we don't have him yet, because he's a fugitive. He's a scalp at the time. He's a scalping tickets legit tickets to sporting events. So I'm like, according to John Smith, blah, blah, I go, but it gets to Foster and Laurie, and Tom's like, nah. He goes, that case with the trial, Henry Shasha Brown back. I go, yeah, but this guy's not even mentioning him. He's mentioning, this guy Robert Vickers and Twyman Myers, and so he says, no. He says, that's, he goes, that,
Also, you may have had the shooters, but you don't know if you had all the guys in the conspiracy.
No, he's just basically. So what happens is, Tom puts me in touch with Roy Artisan, who was the case detective in the night, who caught Foster and Laurie. He was a young detective. It was one of his first cases, if I recall correctly. So I speak to Roy, and Roy's like, "Kid, what's bothering you?" You know what? I'm like, "Hey," I'm on the phone with him. I'm like, "Yeah, Roy." I said, I go through this thing with Roy. I tell him what I'm doing back and forth. He goes, "Well, what is your guy saying?" I said, "He's telling me Robert Vickers." He goes, "Yes." He goes, that's exactly who did it. I'm like, "What?" I go, "But you got you got Ronald Anderson, a deed as the getaway driver, and Herman Bell." He goes, "No." He goes, "Those were staged photo arrays. Chief Seaman told us to stage those arrays, and we inserted photographs, and those guys, the witnesses viewed the photographs before we put them in the photo arrays, And I'm like, what?
Wow, he told you that, huh?
And if he didn't, but again, you have to take the black eye. You got to start from, like I said, corroborate.
Absolutely.
As you well know, I'm talking to the choir here. So then we find a cab driver who picked up, who we believe is Robert Vickers that night. After the shooting, he escaped by cab, and the cab driver who picked out Herman Bell tells us, he goes, they
just got out.
They showed me the picture first, and then they put it in. He goes, they showed me the picture first, and then I picked them out of. So 30 plus years later, the eyewitness cab driver who 99 fine, remembers picking out Bell's picture, but remembers that it was staged. And of course that's that's going to be a hiccup for us if it ever came to prosecution. But it is what it is. It
Right.
happened, and Bell was not involved in that. He was involved, of course, as we know, convicted of Piagentini and Jones. And it turns out that our witness now, another crime that he provided information on, and he was, and it was his information that I went off on the Green homicide. And again, we didn't have him. I only had what the information he provided back then. So taking that information, I was able to corroborate what the team was able to corroborate what this witness had told the FBI and the NYPD back in 1972 about the Green homicide in 1971. Not having him, and identifying which BLA members were at the safe house in Atlanta at the time, who came back with the cop's gun and badge in a bag, and Ronald Anderson was down there. So, and that was the thing. Ronald Anderson was in Atlanta. He wasn't in, it's a month later, but he was picking tomatoes with Andrew Jackson, and the witness in Florida. But anyway, so we were able to take that and talk to former BLA members who did go down to Atlanta, Fulton County, and testify against Freddie Hilton. But this was all based off the cooperating witness from 1972, who provided information on Foster and Laurie. So with that, taking all that information, and also to keep Freddie Hilton in jail, what was paramount at the time is because we had him for Hilton for the Green homicide, was to not allow him to be released from custody in Brooklyn on the child molestation, because we know what would happen then. He would take the same route that Chesmont took, and he'd wind up in Cuba with the rest of these 90 plus U.S. fugitives, so we got to keep him in jail. And at the time, Fred Marone, our director of police, who was lost in the World Trade Center, killed in the World Trade Center, along with my chief at the time, Jimmy Ramito, they just gave me the helicopter, Port Authority helicopter, and they're like, whatever you need, you call us, you have pre-approval. So the team, myself, Atlanta detective that was just assigned, and Don Haldeman, we just basically jumped the seaboard, the eastern seaboard on the Port Authority helicopter, finding BLA members, Philadelphia, Rhode Island, DC, and getting them prepared, corroborating statements for the affidavit for the homicide, which we got, and then of course later on down the road to go down to Atlanta to testify. But if Fred Marone and Chief Amito didn't give us that helicopter and the assets that we needed, Hilton would, in my opinion, would have walked, and he'd be a fugitive in Cuba now. So, and like I said, unfortunately, we lost Director Marone and Chief Amito in the World Trade Center on 9/11. But don't forget what they did, and Fred Marone was a former New Jersey State Trooper, so he was quite familiar with Joanne Chesmart and the BLA.
Is there any hiding out now? 90 is that a real number, Tom?
It was back then. I don't know what the number is now. But FLAN, BLA, left wing and murderers. Murderers not associated with any group were in Cuba. Yes.
I was always surprised our country decided to, open relations with them when they had so many fugitives hiding there. And I mean, I know.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have Cuban cop killers in Miami. So
I'm sure.
Where they have a legit right there. Where okay, well, you give us our cop killers, and which of course they didn't offer, but. They bitch and moan, rightfully so too, about the
Before we wrap up, I want to know how did Forster and Laurie get close, Tom? I know that there's a man that was not arrested for Forster and Laurie, but he's been arrested, and I want you to mention the people that helped get him arrested. Yeah. He's going to leave jail on a fine box.
Again, it goes to you had a detective in Intel / counterterrorism by the name of Sean Foley, former 9th Precinct cop, and I met him with Tom while working there. And throughout the years, he'd stop in. Like a lot of cops.
Roads lead to Tom.
Just exactly. The three of us here, just to pick. The word of the day. What's the crime tip of the day? I mean, it was just a complete learning experience. But so that's how I met Sean. And then when after 9/11, from the narcotics until whatever he was working, of course, everything goes towards counterterrorism, rightfully so. So Sean would call me to pick my brain on terrorism. Hey, I'm doing this and that. I'm like, yeah, So and Sean ran some major cases with the NYPD counterterrorism. He had sources in, he was just unbelievable, the things that he was doing. A lot of the cases that both federal and with state were Sean's cases / informants. So with that said, I'm talking to Sean, I'm like, hey, and I had been keeping track on Robert Vickers, main suspect, only left alive in Forster and Laurie, in my opinion. And so I'm like, hey, where are you? He goes, oh, I'm up in Albany and Saratoga. Oh, I said, I got the perp, so we're looking at it, is up there back and forth, and gave him Vickers' name, his current name, Rashad, whatever the hell it is. And so Sean takes that, and he's working with Albany, obviously, on drug / terrorism, and lo and behold, they track a number to Vickers, and Sean puts in again with his sources, he's unbelievable. He puts in a CI, the first CI, and again the former BLA member Vickers is aware that and we decide for her to bring books in, books that were written about that mentioned Vickers, some written by the BLA, some others not, but to bring these books in, because how are you going to bring your subject up? Vickers suspects that she's an informant. She's a drug user, and so and how he noticed is that he describes this to another of Sean's informants who's wired up that, hey, these cops think I'm stupid. And I interviewed Vickers 3 times, so he's aware of major case looking into him. We polygraphed him, rolled his prints, identified more prints that we recovered from a bomb making manual from the scene of Foster and Laurie that are Robert Vickers. So anyway, so he gets it, and he gets to that. He mentions that, and so he's telling this to the second CI, like they think I'm stupid. I left that book in the village. So he goes into detail how he left the book in the village, how how they were hiding out him, Carmen Myers, and Ronald Carter, the 3 major suspects in Foster and Laurie. Carter was killed, ironically, with Laurie's gun in St. Louis on February 14th, 1972, after shooting police officer Archibald. So, I mean, it's and consistently denied even knowing Carter, both to Detective Bill Butler from Piagentini and Jones, when Butler interviewed Victor in August of '72 in Newark after he was involved in the shooting of police officer Michael Meza. He denied it. He denied it then. Denied it to the FBI throughout the years. Denied it to me twice, and then a 3rd time. But now he tells the second CI on how him, Carter, and Myers were avoiding the dragnet that night in the East Village. And even though there's different cells in the village, he only mentions 3 people. 3 of them happen to be the prime suspects in Foster and Laurie. So I confronted him with this at the interview after he's arrested for the drugs in Albany, which Sean and Albany PD put together the case. And Vic, I'm retired now, but Vickers mentions at trial that this is just all a setup, mentions me by name. So he opens the door. Vickers opens the door at his trial to bring me into the case because, Jasper Mills was the ADA from Albany. Jasper pleaded with the Manhattan DA. He said, "I will try this case, Foster and Laurie. I will try this case, and I will win." Dan Bibb, who's known to friend and known to all of us.
Great guy.
He had the case. He had the case. Dan and I traveled throughout the United States interviewing BLA members. And Harvey Rosen, one of his quotes was, another homicide ADA. He says, "I've gone to trial with less and won." But for me, hearing Vickers on tape in the video, admitting, to these what I suspected, now he's admitting it, and confronted with it, after his arrest,
So Foster's grandson is a cop in a knife now. Have you ever met that kid?
No, not the grand. I met his what would have been his step brother, of course.
I know you knew his father, Foster's father.
Yes, I did. Yes, Mr. Foster shared some intimate, details with me. Some, of course, very heartbreaking, and as well as and his wife has passed since, Jacqueline.
It's amazing the trauma these families go through, and their sons and daughters still end up becoming cops. I mean, we talked a little bit about how it's a calling, and I mean, it's it really is. I mean, I'm the son of a cop. I think it's the family business. And
the only reason I'm smiling, Bill, is because some of their sons, like there was one. This guy Paul Stewart. He supplied the Maverick to the Curry and Benetti shooting outside of Hogan Address, on Riverside Drive. Him and Frank Fields. Frank Fields was, they were involved in that attempted assassination. their kids, became perps, So, and I went after them when they were skating on different crimes. The courts didn't know, or the jurisdictions didn't know who. So I would call up and say, no, don't give him that deal. No, what do you have to play with? He's like, oh, and then of course, I would let the parents know that no, he's not, So, yes.
We're in 2020. The Black Panther Party has been kind of reconstituted as a political movement, more so on the West Coast and here in the East, but all part of the Black Lives Matter movement, which seems to be getting hijacked from different people. Actually, like a lot of white people seem to be hijacking it. But that's
how about that Beyonce Super Bowl thing where she's in the costume? I mean, that brought it to everybody's living room. I mean, people are making cracks about it, but look where we are a couple of years after that, Jerry. I mean,
So is two questions. Are our current cops at risk from a BLA type movement? Now, I know we've had cop assassinations that were kind of racially motivated. Ramos and Lou, the 5 cops in Dallas, the 3 in Baton Rouge, some others. But they seem to be like mentally ill people who get activated by social media and go to strike blow for their cause. Not like a organized cell that's out there committing violence as a political statement. Could a group, like, about how secure the BLA was. You said it during the interview that sometimes the cells wouldn't even trust each other because, they got to have operational security. In this day and age, do you think that the BLA would be able to organize, or a group that would be able to organize and go out and kill cops, or is the advances in modern technology, cops talk to each other better now than they did 50 years ago?
No,
that's the question.
Obviously, those tactics work, and they don't have to copy it. They have the people who were intimately involved in those assassinations. Her name escapes me right now. She's the one of the head of the BLA right now, Susan Rosenberg. Okay, she was involved. I mean, you read the book, The Big Dance. That's about the Nyack robbery. Killing cops,
killing cops, yeah.
breaking out Joanne Chesmont out of prison. She was involved in. She was apprehended in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, with explosives, bombs. She's now, one of the heads of Black Lives Matter. So it's not even the fact that they have to go and research it. The person who was instrumental in killing cops, robbing banks, breaking people out of prison, is the head of the organization. So, it's like us going to Tom Nerney. Unfortunately now cops have to learn of Tom Nerney through us and detectives like Tom Nerney and Sean Paul,
there's no detective like Tom Nerney.
But they have to hear about it. Now you have this person physically there, and of course they learn by their mistakes too. So she's even better at it. Oh no, this is how we got caught. This is how So they have a trained, experienced terrorist, convicted terrorist, running their organization. So it's not even like a possibility, Jerry. It's actually happening.
So the Black Panther Party, which was a political movement, spun off and became the Black Liberation Army, which became
not all Panthers became the military wing of the Black Panthers became the Black Liberation
Army. Let's be
Army.
clear. Black Lives Matter. Most Black Lives Matter people just want to stand in the street and hold up a sign or hashtag a tweet. They're not.
I don't know. Obviously, I'm out of the game, so I don't. You talk about the movement itself, and when you start, and again, the murky line between politics and then, which is what they use, and let's face it, they had some legitimate gripes back then, as they do now, but to handle it the way that they're handling it now, no, it's number one, too political, because obviously the presidential election coming up, so they're using it, and they have the backing of the left-wing politicians, as the BLA did back then, rich doctors from Long Island and back then financially, they besides they were heavily involved in the drug trade, which they deny, but of course they were. They're ripping off drug dealers, ripping off their own, their own neighborhood. But anyway, they it's there, and you only need a certain cell to carry out, and you have these agitators who are, as we've seen by film and by arrest, and who come, plant things, talk somebody who's excited, okay, do this, and then fade back into the crowd. So the tactics that were used back then are being used today, and it's very possible we're going to see the fake 9/11 calls or legit 9/11 calls, and the opportunists that are going to assassinate police officers. And these cops weren't killed because they were black and white, like again, folklore, misrepresentation. Guys, they killed. Piazzini and Jones were covering a housing. That wasn't their call. Housing didn't answer up on the radio. I know it's hard to believe, but and it was legit domestic that they went to. It wasn't, and it was just an opportune time that the BLA took at that time to assassinate Piazzini and Jones. Foster and Laurie, same thing. That was a fictitious call. After they handled a legit call, and they came staged at a deli and assassinated them because they were blue, not because they were black or white. These cops were killed because they were blue.
Gotcha. Tom, we're gonna put some pictures up of Tom Nerney and Officer Green, because both of them have gone. Obviously, Officer Green was murdered. Tom Nerney died a couple of years ago. And we'll also put a picture of Foster and Laurie up on the web. Tom, your dedication to the profession is outstanding. Yours, you really made a difference in a lot of lives. Certainly the families and the descendants of Officer Green and the family and descendants of Officers Foster and Laurie who know that justice was brought, even if it was just a small measure. And of course, the other cold cases that you worked. We're glad you're still here. You almost got killed in '93. You almost got killed in '01. Glad you're still here. You've been a good guest. We always like to rate our guest Zoom rooms. You got a great Zoom room. Fantastic. Got a lot of stuff there arrayed geometrically. I like it. Hung very well, hung very precisely. I like that. The way we rate that kind of thing. My Zoom room sucks, but that's all right. I'm the host. I'm allowed to have a sucky Zoom room. Bill, as a co-host, you also have a very good Zoom room. I like your stuff back there.
It's a work in progress.
Very good. I'll say one thing about Bill's poster back there. It says New York City, the greatest detectives in the world. The late Jack Maple, the guy who invented CompStat, was never a detective. He was a cop, became a sergeant, became a lieutenant, then became a deputy commissioner. He's considered a genius and a savant in the crime-fighting world. And then he got to consult in a lot of different cities. And he said, yeah, I used to hear New York City, greatest detectives in the world. And then I went and worked in other cities, and they are the greatest detectives in the world. So Jack Maple says so. Bill's got to sign and prove it. To everybody who watched our episode, thanks for tuning in. Tom, thanks for being a guest. You're a great cop and a great American. I'm proud to call you a friend.
Truly is.
Thank you for having me.
Bill, thanks for
your service, Tom.
Thanks for hosting, and thanks for having a great room, Bill. Not as good as Tommy's, but pretty good. Everybody out there.
I'm working on it.
Thanks for watching us.
If you talk to John Faust, give him my regards, huh?
Hey,
I certainly will.
Save the chit chat for later. To everybody, thanks for watching. This is the weekly roundup at InsideBlue360.com. Be safe.